Hey guys, it's Mrs. Millot. We are ready to start day 2 of chapter 17. We're going to finish up the male reproductive system and then move on to the female reproductive system. The female reproductive system is much more detailed than the male was. There's more parts, there's more disorders and stuff. You need to be familiar with it and so forth. But just a few more things with the male system. First of all, let's talk about fertilization. This is when the sperm travels up through the female's reproductive tract, through the vagina, the cervix, the uterus, the fallopian tubes. And along the way, the large number of the sperm will die. But that doesn't mean that they all do. In fact, some sperm have been known to survive the female's reproductive tract for up to 3 days. And most of the time, if an egg is to get fertilized, it's going to happen in the female's fallopian tubes. And then as it is fertilized, remember we talked about how that is a zygote. It kind of rolls down into the uterus where it can then implant. Now, the important thing to remember is that only one sperm can fertilize an egg at a time. When you have twins, what happens, there's 2 different kinds of twins. There is identical twins, which is when one sperm fertilizes one egg, and as it is dividing and going through the process of mitosis, it divides into 2 babies. The other kind of twins are fraternal twins, and this is when a woman has 2 eggs released and they both get fertilized. And so because identical twins start out with the same DNA of 1 egg and 1 sperm, they are what is identical. So remember we talked about the difference between X's and Y's and the male and the female. So if somebody is identical twins, they will either both be girls or both be boys. If somebody has fraternal twins, on the other hand, that is not necessarily the case. That's how you can get twins that are a boy and a girl. It doesn't mean that fraternal twins can't be 2 girls or 2 boys. It's just that with identical twins, you can't. It's not physically possible to get a girl and a boy. Now, the last thing with the male reproductive system are a few, actually only 2 disorders to talk about. The first of which is cryptorchidism. That's a hard word to say. This is a congenital abnormality that when the baby is developing inside mom's belly, that the testes don't descend all the way down into the scrotum. As a baby is forming, whether he's male or female, the ovaries the ovaries or the testes form in the abdomen. And if the baby is a boy, they gradually descend down into the scrotum. But sometimes they don't make it quite all the way. Either the baby's born early or they just don't make it all the way down for whatever reason. And that is the case with this disorder. What they will have to do is do surgery when the child is still young, move them down into the scrotum. That way they can have children. Because remember, the testes have to be located outside of the body so that the sperm does not get affected by the temperatures and that kind of thing. The other disorder related to the male is phimosis. This is when the foreskin of the penis gets excessively tight to the point where it can actually cut off blood supply to the baby. Excuse me a sec. Not to the baby. Sorry, wrong topic here. It can cut off blood supply to the penis. So, of course, that we don't want that to happen. And so they would have to have surgery. Essentially, they have to have a circumcision. All right, so now we're going to move on and start talking about the female reproductive system and go through a couple of the first parts of the female reproductive system. So as you can see on the next slide, there is a larger number of different parts in the female reproductive system, but we're going to start with the ovaries. These are the sex glands of the female. They are located in the female's pelvic cavity, so they're down on either side of the lower part of the abdomen. Now, they are separate from the uterus, but they are connected through ligaments to the uterus. And inside our ovaries are thousands of follicles in which the eggs are located. Once these eggs mature, they move to the outside of the ovary, where they can be released during ovulation, which is when the eggs are released. Now, the job of the ovaries is to produce the hormones for the reproductive system, and we talked about those in chapter 10, and those were the estrogen and progesterone. Of course, they are responsible for the female's secondary sexual characteristics and that kind of thing. And they help with the female's menstrual cycle and stuff as well. Next is the fallopian tubes. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as the uterine tubes, but the more common name is the fallopian tube. They actually are extensions up from the uterus. They go out toward the ovaries, but they are not physically connected to the ovary. About size-wise, they're about 5 inches in length. At the end of these tubes are these little finger-like projections called fimbriae. And what these fimbriae do is they kind of like are in a wave kind of pattern, and they brush up against the ovary during ovulation until it releases the egg. And then as the egg is released, it kind of like goes around them and gives them a hug kind of and pulls them into the actual fallopian tube, where they can roll down toward the uterus then. And what helps them along that way is a wave-like motion of muscle contractions called peristalsis that helps push the egg in the right direction. Now, some of you may have heard the term tubes tied. The medical name for that is a tubal ligation. And this is similar to what a man goes through when he has a vasectomy, like we talked about yesterday. But the difference is with the female, it's a major surgery. They do require a general anesthesia where they're put to sleep and that kind of thing, where they go in and they cut 2 parts of the fallopian tube, tie them off so that the egg can't get from the ovary over into the uterus. Now, remember, just to compare the difference between a vasectomy and a tubal ligation. The vasectomy is done in the doctor's office under local anesthesia. They get a little bit of time off work and they're back to work. Whereas a tubal ligation for a woman is an abdominal surgery. They require general anesthesia, so that it's done in the operating room. Now, sometimes when a woman is having a C-section, and she wants her tubes tied, they'll go ahead and do it while they're in there. Otherwise, they'll have to have an additional surgery in addition to delivering the baby. And one more thing about the tubal ligation, the recovery is much longer as well. And the last thing that we're going to talk about today is the uterus. It is a hollow muscular pear-shaped organ in the female's abdomen. It's in the lower part of the abdominal cavity as well. So it's kind of right in the middle. It sits in between the bladder and the rectum. And there's 3 parts of the uterus. You have the very top part. It's kind of rounded. That's called the fundus. You have the middle section, that's the sides and the whole middle section, called the corpus or the body. And then the lower section of the uterus, kind of like the door to the uterus that opens during labor, is called the cervix. It's the lower part. It's actually the lower part of the uterus. Now, the uterus itself is made to grow a baby and provide a place for that to happen. Also, as the woman's menstrual cycle goes on, it builds up the lining and tries to provide a place for an egg to implant so that the nutrients can be delivered to the new fetus, or the new zygote, I guess, when it first implants, and then the embryo, and then it becomes a fetus. But there are actually 3 different layers to the female reproductive system. The innermost layer, the one that builds up throughout the month, and then if the woman does not become pregnant, it sloughs off and is shed through the menstrual cycle. That layer is called the endometrium. The middle layer is made of muscle, and it is called the myometrium. So middle, muscle, and myocardium go together. And then last but not least is the outermost layer, made out of serous type of tissue, is called the parametrium. And that is where we're going to stop for today. If you have any questions, shoot me an email or let me know, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks, guys.